today I'm starting a brand new series. And I've been preparing for a series or thinking about it for months and been wanting to do this. And it's called As a Man Thinks. And if you look at the artwork on the screen or up here on stage, you see three symbols there. First is a person's face, because humanity, we have the ability to ask questions that no other created thing can ask. Who am I? Why am I here? Is there a God? What's my connection or relationship with Him? And those are the questions that we're asking, the big questions of life. And what we're praying is to land on the truth. What is truth? When Pilate was encountering Jesus and sending him to the cross, he asked Jesus this question: what is truth? What is truth? Is there truth that's out there? See, all the thoughts and beliefs that we have came from somewhere. Do you ever stop and ask yourself, why do I believe this? Why do I think this? How did I arrive at this view? Well, for most of us, it came from our parents or our culture we grew up in, the neighborhood we were, the school we were at, somebody had influenced us. It can be trauma in our lives. But all of these things come together to help us develop our view of the world. We get all those views down, and then we go to college. And in college, everything we believe is challenged. And it's also a critical time in our thinking and development as a human being, because we're starting to move away from mom and dad's ideas to our own ideas. What do I believe about this? What do I think about this? And when you have people there telling you, but this is a new truth you need to believe, and this is kind of the pressure, and it is new, and you seem like this person who now is independent from your parents, you begin to think in new ways. And it's these new ways that challenge what we hold on to historically. See, most of us believe things without realizing how we ever came to that belief. And the goal today is, as you mature, and maybe on a college campus or through other people's influence, is to discern, what is my truth? What do I believe? Now, in this series, I am working from the premise, which I shouldn't even have to say this, but it's true, that there is absolute truth. There is truth. And your truth, and I know this is going to be hard for some of you to hear, but your truth may not be true. Some of my truth hasn't been true. And thank God that He is our source of truth. Just because you feel it deeply or perceive the world in a certain way does not excuse you from being accountable to God's truth. Okay? The Apostle Paul said it this way in Romans chapter 1. He said, they know the truth about God because He has made it obvious to them. So this isn't like God has kept things as a secret. The truth is obvious. How is the truth obvious? Look at the next verse. For ever since creation, ever since the world was created, people have seen the earth and sky. Through everything God has made, they can clearly see His invisible qualities, His eternal power, His divine nature, so they have no excuse for not knowing God. Not one person will be able to stand before God and say, I didn't know, and get a pass. God has revealed Himself. I think, as Mandy said, our tendency is, though, to want to look away and to run our own lives. We're living in a time in mankind where over 2,000 years of values are being challenged. Church is being pushed to the fringe on social issues because we're not progressive and stuck in the past. Views about morality that have been commonly held in our culture are being challenged, and we're moving away from those values. Now, this is not something new, but it is something that is accelerating. And I don't think there's a person in this world, whether you land on the left or the right, that doesn't agree the fact that our morality as a nation and our beliefs are rapidly changing. You hear more and more people say, but really, religion is not contributing. It's part of the problem, because aren't all religions equal? What they actually mean is no religion has an exclusive knowledge of reality. And by default, none of them should be taken seriously as a guide for life. Since there's so many views and so many ideas out there, nobody knows who has the right one, so let's not put such an emphasis on religion. Devotion to God is portrayed as something for the closed or simple-minded, fanatics and extremists. This is how it's being popularized more and more in Hollywood and in current thinkers. Society tells the church to lay down moral values and convictions and conform for the sake of peace and unity, just coexist. And Jesus was for love and peace, but he also stood for truth, and that's what got him in trouble. The problem is that what people believe is, since there are so many paths to God, so many beliefs, and I hear this more and more, isn't this, Tony, just like the old story of the blind men and the elephant? I think this comes out of India, where all these blind men were led up to an elephant, and they didn't know what it was, and one touched the legs and said, oh, this must be a tree. Another one touched the trunk, and it moved, oh, this must be a snake. Another one went up and touched the side and said, this must be a building. And so therefore, everybody has a little bit of the truth. The Buddhist has a little bit of truth. The Muslim has a little bit of truth. The Christian has a little bit of truth. But nobody can be so arrogant and bold to claim that you have the truth. That doesn't fit in a pluralistic society. But here's the problem. This overused metaphor claims that we're all blind. Jesus makes the opposite claim. He claimed to be the light of the world. He came to open eyes and free people. He didn't say, I'm just one path. He said, I'm the exclusive path to God. In Luke 4:18, in his first message, he established his message right there. He said, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, for he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim that captives are released, the blind see, and the oppressed are set free. Look at those words, captive, blind, oppressed. That's not just people that are economically and socially oppressed and in need of social justice, which is a very real thing in our world. But he is talking specifically people who are blinded to the truth, who are deceived, who have been misinformed. Light is a metaphor for illumination over ignorance. And God has given us his word as truth. It's not that we lack truth. We just lack a commitment to it. Trusting it. Unfortunately, theologically, what's happened is we've moved away from the obvious teachings of the Bible to what will the Bible allow? Think about that. I'm in theological discussions with people all the time, and it's very seldom about what the Bible says. But, well, couldn't the Bible really be meaning this? No, let's go with what's obvious. Occam's razor, the most obvious answer is probably the right one. Let's start with that. And then let's find out why you're deviating from that. Is it because you're really seeking God? Or are you seeking your own way? And you want to justify it because you want both. You want to follow God, but really you want to lead your own life. And those ideas come in conflict in our brain, and if we can't marry the two, then we're uncomfortable. See? This is the challenge of more and more people that sit in churches. Example of how our modern culture and its views are challenging biblical views. Let's talk about something light. Here we go. This doesn't affect anybody. Something not controversial at all. So, what's God's ideal? It's established right in the beginning of the Bible. A man and woman, God created them to complement each other. He made them to fit, sort of, you know what I mean. And for the purpose of sharing a covenant of love and for procreation. Be fruitful, multiply. This is a good thing. The challenge is what's happened is sex is being removed further and further from that exclusive ideal. Let me give you an example. Promiscuity, casual sex, sex outside of marriage. Any relationship, sex outside of marriage, removes sex from marriage, obviously. So you've taken sex that is exclusively for marriage and you've removed it. So this is one step away from God's plan. Next one. Abortion. Abortion takes procreation out of marriage. Because if we get pregnant, we can fix that. So now, abortion just becomes another means of moving sex outside of marriage. Next one. No-fault divorce. Hey, we just didn't get along. So what happens? We divorce. It's nobody's fault. Well, what happens is it removes sex from covenant and devotion that God intended. Fidelity. Next one. The Tinder app, hookup culture, representing that. What's it done? It's removed sex from romance. Now sex is just pleasure. That's it. Next. LGBTQI plus community has removed sex from the male-female binary. When God created man and woman, this is now changed and being questioned in our culture. Next. Transgender wave is removing sex from biological gender. Next. Polyamory. This is a hot new movement that if you have a girlfriend and a boyfriend and another boyfriend or another girlfriend, you can just all be together. And 3 people can join into a relationship. That's polyamory. So it removes sex from the 2-person relationship. Now think about this. All of these are issues that are progressing in our culture and starting to define the narrative. And every one of them is, could you say, strategically moving society away from God's plan? It would take some kind of supernatural kind of strategy to infect the whole world with those kind of thoughts. It would take a long time, and someone that's watched humanity for a long time to come up with this kind of idea and watch it play out. And just as water in a tub starts to drain and gets faster and faster as it goes toward the end, so I think is happening in our world today. What's left? Sex is just a means of pleasure and power. I read this week. This is somebody how they defined sex now. College professor said, sex is just playing for grown-ups. What's the big deal? It's just an animal pleasure, no different than hunger or thirst. If you do pursue marriage, that's fine, but be true to yourself. Back to your truth. And as long as you're true to you, that's all that matters, and the rest of us just have to embrace that. Do you see where 2 trains are heading toward each other? At breakneck speeds. And this is the world in which we find ourselves. Now, has this made, all this progressive thinking, has it made our world better? That's the question. I'm willing to concede, as a pastor, as a Christian, that if there's an idea that's better, maybe we've misinterpreted the Bible, and maybe we've got it wrong. But I don't know that these things are helping us. Look at divorce, for example. This is all the effects on a child's behavior. A child that goes through divorce. The number one predictor of divorce is if your parents got divorced. It's just the way it is. The inability to attach to someone in a committed relationship and work through challenges and insecurities that come up and self-blame and poor self-worth all are connected to divorce. Nobody breaks covenant and it not cost something. Now, if you've been divorced, that's not an attack. It's just to say that, look, life is tough. And when we get outside of God's realm, and you may have felt like divorce was the only way for you out of a bad situation, I get that. But I'm telling you, there is baggage with it. There is a cost to it. And you've got to adapt to that and be aware of it. Cohabitation. Interesting article I was just reading in the New York Times talked about the downside of cohabiting before marriage. In this article, they said couples who cohabit before marriage, especially before an engagement or otherwise clear commitment, tend to be less satisfied in their marriages and more likely to divorce than couples who do not. These negative outcomes are called the cohabitation effect. It's a syndrome, but you don't hear it talked about in our culture. In television, in media today, in TikTok, you would think that this is the most common thing in the world. It's smart. It's right. It's efficient. It's financially just. The problem is, it just goes against God. Promiscuity. When you have sex outside of marriage, there are chemicals that are released. When you have sex, period, there's chemicals that are released in your brain. Vasopressin, I think is one, and oxytocin. And what happens is these turn on our attachment system so that our brain says, attach to this person. And you do. We call it soul ties and things like that. When a person has casual sex outside of marriage over and over and over again, the brain quits producing these chemicals. It quits releasing them when you have sex. It becomes like brushing your teeth or something. And so because these chemicals are not released, the last person you're with that maybe you want to spend the rest of your life with, you have the inability to really deeply attach to them. You say, but we're in love and it's different. But when that love is tested, the attachment has not been there. So it's going to be much tougher for you to be able to make it. In all of these, there are workarounds. There are ways that we can counsel and help people, and there's mental health counseling and drugs you can take. But all of it is to pacify a bad situation because people got outside of God's plan. Do you see that? And that was from a Psychology Today article. Abortion. There's much documented but little talked about data about the effects of abortion on women's mental and emotional health. Research interviewed 40 women who had had miscarriages and 80 women who had had abortions. What they discovered was women who had miscarriages suffered anxiety and depression for about 6 months. But all they went back was 5 years. At 5 years, every one of the women that had had abortion were struggling with depression. It's even causing some on the left to go, maybe we shouldn't have such a hardline view on abortion because it's not that healthy for women. Transgender therapy, the challenge in sexual reassignment surgery and hormone therapy for those who identify as transgender do not benefit their emotional health, which is the main rationale behind it. Transgender and non-binary youth are at elevated risk for depression, thoughts of suicide, and attempted suicide compared to youth who are cisgender and heterosexual. That's in a study of 3 separate studies of 2,400 young people. If you're wondering about cisgender, that means comfortable with your own stuff, how you were born. You're comfortable with your gender, you're cisgender. Isn't that weird that we have to invent words like that today? Pornography is trending toward increasing violence and cruelty, misogynistic against women, and aimed at children. And the sad thing is, people feel like they can have it both ways. While the Me Too movement was championing the rights of women, which is healthy, at the same time, the number one selling book series for women in our country was 50 Shades of Grey, which is about male sexual domination. What is going on? It seems to me more like liberation is starting to look like enslavement. What if this, again, is all part of a strategy to move us away from God? Because that's the enemy's goal: misinformation, lies, deception, distraction. Now, what I want to say to everybody here is I love you. As your pastor, I care about you. I care about you more than your past, more than your sexual preference or identification. We love you. We love you because you're so much more than just your sex. You're so much more than your past. And so please, don't see me as some red-faced, ultra-conservative preacher up here condemning you. Because that's not my heart. And thankfully, it's not God's heart either. Jesus said, as Mandy shared earlier, you'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Now, freedom from something has to be in there. You can't know the truth and have the truth set you free. What's it setting us free from? From lies. In one of his, the Apostle Paul said this. He says, the devil has taken us captive to do his will. So here's the enemy's strategy. If he can sow a lie into your brain, and it can be coated in a lot of sugar, and it can seem wonderful and compassionate, and you've got a friend who's really wrestling with this, so you want to identify with them, and therefore you have to embrace their idea. No, you don't have to embrace their truth to love them. You don't have to. You can hold to the truth. You know, if somebody is dying of cancer and you have chemo in this hand or, Skittles in this hand, I think they need the chemo. Now, the chemo is going to be uncomfortable and the Skittles is going to be a lot more fun, but they need real friends that'll tell them the truth and love them. And if people doubt that we love them, then it doesn't matter what you say. The enemy's strategy is to get you to believe a lie. And if he can sow that lie into your mind and have you think it's the truth, you'll take yourself out. And that's his goal. He doesn't have to do anything. That's all the power that he has left, is lies. And if he can get you to believe the lie is the truth, he has you, because you'll destroy yourself and hurt people around you. That's why Jesus said in Matthew 24:4, watch out that no one deceives you. He's telling his disciples this, his closest men around him. He's saying, be careful, because spiritual decay happens one compromise at a time. One compromise, one thought, one lie that gets embedded. See, there's lots of lies flying around in the air. It's just which ones do we embrace and personalize to where that lie, because nobody's going to say, well, I believe this lie, and that's what I base my life upon. It has to be twisted into truth. Jesus also warned about false influencers who would deceive many. He said, because in verse 12, Matthew 24, because the increase of wickedness, moving further from God's way of thinking, the love of most will grow cold. That's how Jesus described the last days. Now he's speaking to believers. The love of most will grow cold. cold toward God, cold shoulder, distant from God, not warmed by His light and His love. You know, during COVID, when you went in the hospital or other places, they checked your temp. I wonder if we had a spiritual temperature checker when you came in this morning, how you do. A little chill in the air, or is there a warm passion? See, this is what Jesus calls us to. Are there currently any lies that you're believing? Lies about your body, your sexuality, your past, whether or not there's hope for your future. Maybe you're believing a lie right now about whether or not you're the real object of God's love and affection. Can God really love me? Yeah, He can. And that's the absolute truth. And we all go through times of questioning and times we don't feel close to God. And that's why we come here. That's why we have like nights of worship. So we can just be in His presence and remember, oh yeah, that's what I like. That's what I need. That's what refreshes me. That's what fills me. That's what changes me. That's what helps me to lay down my depression, my discouragement. This is where life comes from. When we open up God's Word and ask God to reveal Himself and ask Him to shape us in our thinking to reflect His Lordship in our lives and His values. So how do we respond this morning? The ancient prophet Jeremiah counseled a group of people who were ignoring the fact that they were moving farther from God. They were about to be taken into captivity in Babylon, conquered, imprisoned for 70 years. And he warns them before this time with compassion. He was known as the weeping prophet. And Jeremiah speaks these words, and I think they're valid for today. This is what the Lord says. Stop at the crossroads and look around. Think about that. The crossroads in your own brain and what you think about, what you listen to, what you follow as truth. This is what we're doing today. He said, ask for the old godly way and walk in it. But isn't anything that's more modern and progressive better? I like some things. I used our Instapot this week, our Instant Pot. I like that. You know, some modern things are good. I used my phone this morning. Some modern stuff is good. But this is more about the big things that we think about. Those roots in our lives and where they go. He says, travel its path and you will find rest for your souls. But you reply, no, that's not the road we want. We don't want to go that way. Yeah, Tony, I hear what you're saying, and I know what I'm risking. And I know that I will have to answer to God and stand before Him someday on the terms of His truth, not mine. And as sincerely as you are, it doesn't matter. You're accountable for God's truth. I posted watchmen over you, and who said, and am saying right now, listen for the alarm, for the sound of the alarm. But you replied, no, we won't pay attention. An entire nation was taken in captivity because everybody's doing it. That's the way of the world. That's just the way it is. I don't want to be on the outside. I don't want to be criticized. Therefore, I'm going to walk this path and somehow walk a path between my friends and society and still have the truth, but still support them in their truth. And the problem is, it's getting harder and harder. That divide is getting wider and wider and wider. That's as wide as I can get. And the wider it gets, There comes a point when you can't span it, and you have to choose. And it's kind of embarrassing when you're struggling out there, span as far as you can to tell your friend, oh, by the way, I can't support you anymore. You know, you could be wrong. Just a little light message on a Sunday. I was actually going to start with our first truth today. This is just my introduction. But I feel like as a pastor, and I've wrestled through this, I've prayed more about this message this week than I have messages in a long time. Mostly because here's my concern, is that the enemy will come in and lie to you and say, he doesn't love you. He's not speaking the truth. You need to go someplace where it's safer. Where you won't be challenged in those ways. And you would miss out, no matter where you are on the span of beliefs. It's fun because I get equally criticized for being way too conservative and way too liberal. It just every few weeks I'll get something, Pastor, you're way too liberal. And then somebody else will say, you're way too conservative. That's exactly where I want to be. Keep you guessing. Because God's truth is that way. You know, Jesus said some pretty radical stuff that the right needs to hear about caring for the poor and equality. And he also said some pretty radical things the left needs to hear about values and family. And this is why we don't neatly fit in any category. We rise above that and say, this is God's kingdom principles, and this is what we live and die by. These are the hills that we die on. So my challenge to you today is to think about what you think about. And if that's in conflict, I would love to talk to you about it. And where I feel like the Bible has all kinds of room, I'll let you know that. And where it doesn't, I'll let you know. I'll let you know my convictions and how I arrived at those. We have other people here that'll be happy to help you in those areas as well. But we have to choose if we're going to embrace God's truth or choose our own. And that's a tough challenge, but there's life if we choose God's way.